I'll never forget the moment standing in my future backyard when I realized I was going to try and make this particular house my home. It was July 2018 and it was hot, really hot. We were in the backyard of the house for sale on La Corona Avenue. The actual house was smaller than we wanted, but in this moment, we were realizing that the yard was actually huge. It was just covered in so many different plants rooted all over the yard with no regard for design or order. Among those plants were a series of fruit trees: plum, peach, pomegranate, orange, apricot. There were also large trees that were already bearing tons of lemons and avocados. When we looked at the yard, that's when we knew we could make this lot our home. We could get rooted in La Corona. Once we were in, we decided to move the trees into different places of the yard that allowed us to create space for our children to play, but also allow the trees to take root and bear fruit. Didn't mean for that to rhyme, but there we go. Our plan surprisingly worked. I say surprisingly because we're so far from green thumbs. In fact, we couldn't even get one of those lettuce grow towers to work for us. And the whole point of those is that they're supposed to just work on their own. So, hey, that's who you're dealing with here. But we love those fruit trees. And I love the seasonality that they brought with them. The peach tree blooming these beautiful flowers in the winter and producing so many peaches in the summer that the weight of all of them brought the branches all the way to the ground. I loved seeing my dog in August eating the plums off the tree before we even got a chance to. And of course, I guess I just love year round the litany of lemons that garnished many a drink in our old home. Altadena has many more neighbors with much greener thumbs than us. When I used to walk the neighborhood, specifically during COVID, I saw many, many lots, much like the one that was my home before I moved in. Plants everywhere. There was an open space one week. The next week, it was filled with something new, right? Many times these yards could look messy, but who cares, right? They were so rooted in a love of gardening and nature. And, it was such a passion that, hey, if it wasn't the previous yard, it was easy to look past. One group of people who loved what our soil could do was the Altadena Community Garden. The Altadena Community Garden is both a space, a garden itself, and a 501(c)(3) that runs it in partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation. It's right next to it's right next to Loma Alta Park, and it too burned in the fire. I'll be honest, due to its waiting list and my insecurity around not being able to grow the simplest of plants, I wasn't really sure what the garden was all about. I knew neighbors came together and planted vegetables on its soil. I knew it was super popular, hence the waiting list. I knew that people came from all over the county to be a part of it. I almost looked at it like a party I wasn't cool enough to be invited to. But when my neighbor Stewart Campbell reached out and invited me to the garden, I took him up on the invite. I went there on a Saturday morning in June, and I saw a lot of dedicated neighbors at work. Even if I'm not cool enough for the garden, I am all about any organization that's focused on rebuilding anything Altadena has held sacred. And trust me, our town loves this community garden. I warned Stewart, anything you tell me, you'll need to explain to me like I'm a fifth grader, and I may even take that back and ask you to explain it to me like I'm a first grader. He introduced me to the president of the community garden, Joe Nagy. What I saw was perhaps the future of healthy soil in Altadena. They were beginning a process called mycoremediation. I won't try to explain it as well as they do in the interview, but know that it involves oyster mushrooms, innovation, and a little bit of faith. I asked Stewart, who sits on the board of the garden, if he and Joe would explain what they're doing, the expectations for what will happen next, and how they'll be measuring success. We also dive into how homeowners can look into mycoremediation, along with other remediation processes, to help accelerate the timeline for which their soil goes from poisoned by the fire to bearing safe and delicious fruit once more. The Altadena Community Garden is really committed to helping educate in this space. They're also rebuilding an essential part of our community on a limited budget. If you listen to this episode and you like what you hear from Joe and Stewart, please consider going to altadena and either donating directly or follow them on social media so that you can be a part of their journey as they help us all navigate our next steps. Either way, we all need community leaders right now. Joe, Stewart, and the rest of the garden are doing everything they can to educate and innovate. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about plants or mushrooms or fruit, it's about soil. The soil that roots us, nourishes us, and if we care for it right, gives us the foundation to grow again. I'm Austin LaRoche, and this is the Altadena Rebuild, episode 12 Soil. Joe and Stewart, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, let's start with the Altadena Community Garden. So, what was the immediate impact of the Eaton fire on the garden itself, both physically and then I'd say emotionally for your members?
Well, I think it was, like any natural disaster, panic and fear and sort of what comes next. How badly were we affected? We weren't able to see, immediately after the fire, there were some people that were still hanging around the area, but most people were displaced. Even I was, and I'm a couple neighboring towns over. Even I had to leave. So many of our members had to leave the area and spent a long time searching for a place to stay. While the fires were happening, even when I was staying in my hotel, it was, trying to call everybody, trying to see how everyone is, if they need anything, if there's anything we can do. And then, it was kind of a waiting game for a while. We weren't able to go back. I don't remember the specific date, but the National Guard was deployed. They closed off the area surrounding the borders of Altadena, which were basically the fire border zones. And it looked like a different country. It looked like a different place. It wasn't this sort of beautiful and eclectic neighborhood that it has always been. It was, it looked like a war-torn country. There were Humvees and military personnel with machine guns and completely burned down houses. It really is. It's hard to explain what that looks and feels like, but when you see it, it just punches you right in the gut. And early on, it was really hard because these really old buildings and this really kind of beautiful and vibrant community was just devastated and unable to return. And so a lot of the initial, a lot of what we did initially was just trying to be there for people if they needed food or resources or a place to stay. There were a lot of people, there were a lot of organizations helping out, but limited in their capacity. And the community garden was sort of in that boat. The garden was sort of right at the edge of the fire line on Lincoln, and we had our buildings burn. We had our shed burned down. Well, we had two sheds. One was like a wood shed, and then the other one was a brick shed, and the roof and all the tools inside burned. The other building, which was a storage facility operated by the county that sits outside of the grounds, that burned down completely. And it was just a waiting game to try to, the EPA had to come in and the Army Corps of Engineers had to come in and do their thing. So it was at least a month after the fire before we could even see the site and get in there. We had some residents that were in the area that were poking around and taking photos, and we were getting updates even though we couldn't get in. But yeah, just devastating. We have 120-ish members, and about half of them lost their homes. So we had around 60 members lose their homes. So tragic and devastating.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about just the Altadena Community Garden itself, because you've got the physical location, which is this amazing community garden, and then you also have your organization, which you said are members. So maybe tell me a little bit of history of both the actual garden and the organization.
Yeah. So the garden goes back 50 years, 50 plus years. In the 70s, it was started by just local residents getting together and wanting to, you know, be there for each other and garden together. And so they just sort of adopted this plot of land, and it was in a slightly different location at its very beginning. But as time went on, there was this, it was called Mount Low Military Academy that was there that had closed down, and the county had sort of taken over that land and started to formalize the relationship between these gardeners and, I guess the entity of the community garden started to form over the years. And it's changed over time a little bit, just as, the organizational structure. We became a nonprofit, I believe, in the 90s. And I think the name changed slightly. So Altadena Community Garden, the name itself formed, I think, in the early 2000s or late 90s. But the site itself has been there for about 50 years. And just a bunch of people wanting to get together and garden and be there for each other. And I think that still is a big part of the essence of it today. I mean, pre-fire and certainly will be post-fire. I think the changes maybe going forward is our plan to have a lot more outreach, education and outreach.
Mhm.
It is kind of my personal goal and always has been to turn everybody into somewhat of a gardener, uh, if not a proficient gardener. I feel very strongly about that. I think we've kind of disconnected ourselves from our food systems at our own apparel or at our own peril. And so I think, we're attached to these systems that aren't terribly good for us. And we see, the downfalls of commercial gardening and the benefits of localized gardening. It's a really strong community, and people have plants from all over the world, or had plants from all over the world. Hopefully, we'll get a lot of that stuff back, but we'll see. We'll continue to do our best and continue to be more connected and to be more connected to a wider audience.
Mm. I love that. I recently was at a friend's house who lives in the Lincoln Heights area, and they just moved there, and they have like all these different plants and berries and cucumbers and all of these things. I was so jealous because like we couldn't even make a lettuce grow work for us, and that's like supposed to automate gardening, right? Like I'm like the worst gardener, so I'm inspired, and I but because I agree with what you're saying, right? And to an extent, a lot of us in Altadena, even if we couldn't have a plot inside the garden, we did have fruit trees. Like my property, I think we had 7 different fruit trees. And so there, it is something that's part of our community and our DNA. And
Yeah.
so I was really inspired when I went out and saw you guys a couple weeks ago, and you introduced me to something that you're doing there called mycoremediation. So why don't we talk a little bit about what mycoremediation is and
Yeah.
how you're bringing it to the Altadena Community Garden?
Okay. Yeah. Microremediation. Um, so I first, I was growing mushrooms. I've been growing mushrooms for a long time. I've taken a furlough because life is too busy for it, and it's a very delicate and sort of complicated. It can be a complicated process. So I love it, and I've been involved in that community for a while, and have been studying. Like Paul Stamets, who's kind of the godfather of mushrooms. He did a TED talk a while ago about micromediation. That's when I first heard it, and the first sort of experiments that he was doing was cleaning up oil spills. And so he was using micromediation to clean up oil spills, and he had found out that like the other remediation efforts, one being phytoremediation, where they use plants to suck up toxins from soils. Those were largely ineffective against the oil. So they tried this fungus. I believe they used oyster, which is what we're using at the garden. But they just found that, in 6 weeks to 8 weeks time, it had reduced the toxic level by half. And that he discovered that it didn't exist inside the fruiting body of the mushroom. So we call mycoremediation, it's not technically the fruiting body, but the mycelial networks that are pre-fruiting body. And they basically just, they're like little fibers, little webs that go out, and they have this process. It's an enzymatic process where the enzymes break down the chemical structure of the contaminant. So in that case, it was the oil. And so that it was breaking down the oil and turning it into something else. Now, I don't have an extensive chemistry background, so I can't really go into exactly what that looks like as far as which pieces of the strain get broken down. I don't know, but it has been effective, and other places have been using this post-fire remediation. A big part of post-fire is like runoff, or like you hear landslides that happen. So people were creating these wattles, which are like you'll see them that cover like sewer drains, and it's basically just a long sock filled with like compost and mycelium, and that used to filter anything running past it, to not get in the we use it for debris, and we use it to keep the erosion from happening. So that's been a big part of a lot of other people doing it that I've seen. But
So let me ask a question. So
yeah.
when I was there, what I noticed, you had the garden was completely cleared out, and I looked
Mhm.
over and there were all bags, and I said, Stewart, what are those? And you said oyster mushrooms. And I said, oh, and you said they were donated, and which is awesome. And then from my vantage point, they were putting the oyster mushrooms on the soil and then putting hay over it. Am I, as a layman, as someone who can't make the lettuce grow work, am I understanding what that process looks like, in that you're getting all of these oyster mushrooms, you're putting them in the soil, you're watering them down, you're covering them with hay, and then those mushrooms are then connecting with the soil and removing all of the toxins. Is that the easiest way to explain it to the
Yes.
layman out there?
Yes. Yes, there are varying degrees depending on the toxins, but it does break down some easier than others. Some will take a little bit longer. But yes, that process is basically, we have commercial growers of like uh, gourmet mushrooms, is a word, like that sell to restaurants and grocery stores and things like that. But as part of their process, they don't reintroduce the mycelium post fruiting body, which is what we eat as consumers. So the oyster mushroom that you're familiar with, that you buy in a store or a restaurant, that is a fruiting body. That is post um, post inoculation, post when the mycelium reaches the sort of end of uh, what the grow medium, it then fruits. So it's part of its cycle. And so growers, once it fruits, it's harder to reintroduce that substance back into the process. So they have stages of it. And so it's easier, more cost effective for them to just discard that.
Okay.
And I think they try to give it to organizations that'll compost or take it and keep it from the landfill. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to keep it from the landfill. So a lot of that stuff does get thrown away. And even if we weren't remediating the soil, it's a good thing to have as part of your compost. And so it kind of benefits both of us. And so we're trying to keep that as an ongoing resource that we can have. Um, not just for the garden, but for other people in the neighborhood. Sort of building that sort of highway of something that would be discarded before, and now we can make good use of it.
Yeah, I want to get to how it's going to affect us homeowners here in a second. But so right now you've got the mushrooms are all the garden's covered now, right? And there's hay over that. How are you evaluating, the success of this? What's the time frame? Like I wouldn't say it's an experiment because it sounds like it's done, wonders other places, but it is
Yeah,
new for us. And so how are we
yeah,
measuring this and like when will we know if it worked and to what extent?
yeah. It is largely an experiment. We're taking bits of information that we've learned from other people, and applying it and see what happens. So we've taken soil samples pre what we call scrape, which is what the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers did. They come in to remove like the burnt pieces and and all the debris and all that stuff. And then we had the entire area removed. So we had about 3 inches removed, to get rid of like the bigger bits and things like that. As far as so okay, sorry. So after all that's done, we had soil samples happen pre-scrape, and then we've had soil samples post-scrape. And then once the remediation process, we're going to do it at intervals. So we're going to do it at 2-month and then 6-month intervals and see where we're at. If we see that our toxic levels are below our EPA standard of safe consumption or safe exposure, then we'll continue. We'll come back. We'll rebuild the plot boards. We'll do the irrigation, and then we'll welcome members back. If we don't see those, we'll continue the remediation process till we reach that threshold. So our first interval of testing will be about 2 months post remediation. And then once we get the result back, that's kind of where we're at for the next step.
Yeah, and so I know we're looking at, removing toxins. We know we want the soil to be healthy. That is what, you are very kindly explaining to us, who don't understand this nearly as well as you. But what toxins are we trying to eliminate, and what actually makes what's like the measuring point, or the data point that makes you go, okay, this is safe and we're ready to move forward?
Yeah. So we kind of go from like what we expect to find, from so there's a whole list of all these chemicals that are known to be carcinogen and that are known to be in an area post fire. So those include like asbestos, lead. There's a whole slew of metals that we've tested for. PFAs, dioxins and furans. The chart is an extensive chart of testing. I think I have it here in front of me somewhere. But yeah, so metals, there's probably 15-ish metals that we tested for. The PFAs, the dioxins and furans. There are sort of subcategories of all these toxins that we know that are in things like the buildings, like asbestos and lead. Since they are primarily older buildings, that was something that they used when building these older homes. So we know that these are around, and there have been other companies that have done these tests around the area. So we kind of take all that information and we, sort of spreadsheet it all out, and then do the different areas and test for all those things. And so we've been testing at a couple of different sites for these, and it originally took a long time to get them back. I think more organizations are expanding their testing resources to be able to make them more widely available for residents. But certainly in the beginning, there was a bottleneck to getting these results in a timely manner. So I think that has opened up more. I wish I could reference somebody that's doing it. I know there are some organizations that are doing testing for free, and I think, some of the uh, um, government entities are making those more widely available. I can't really reference any of them right now, but I'm sure you can Google that and look up who's doing free soil testing.
Yeah, I know USC was doing some free
Mhm.
soil testing. They did some as well. Obviously, the universities went in on this. So, Stewart, a couple of weeks ago, you invited me and you were explaining all of this to me, and I was like, okay, this is great. And then you said something I wasn't expecting, which was, yeah, and next we're going to do this to our house because you were one of the members of the garden who unfortunately lost your home. So that just blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute, like you guys are like the awesome Altadena Community Garden. I get why you guys get to do this, but we as homeowners can do this. Like, all right, tell the people what it is you're doing and what's actually possible out there for other homeowners.
Sure. So I first learned about mycoremediation because my wife was researching it. My brother-in-law, her brother is a scientist, and so it's always on the top of her mind about the safety of the environment that we'll be returning to when we rebuild. And then I've been with the garden for a couple of years as an associate member, and after the fire, I met Joe and Mary, and they invited me to join the board. And when I learned that they were doing mycoremediation of the garden, that's one of the things that really got me interested in taking on that responsibility. And so for our home, we're looking to mycoremediate basically the entire property. And we're looking into, where to get the mycelium, where to get the hay, where to get, large deliveries of compost. And more importantly, how to get water there because you have to keep it wet in order for it to grow. And our biggest interest right now, I mean, we have a dog and he likes to sniff around. He likes to eat berries off the ground or whatever falls off the trees. And so we're really just thinking about his safety and security. But this is something that's important, I think, for all homeowners to really consider. It's going to be in the air unless we take it out of the soil. If you have kids, if you have pets, the environment that we're living in is really going to influence our future health. And so as we're thinking through that, we've started to consider mycoremediation as kind of the most effective way to do this on a smaller basis. So we're going to be starting, I think, in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be getting mycelium, laying it on the ground, wetting it, spraying it with water, covering it with hay, and trying to keep it alive so that it can start doing that work right now. And it might seem a little early for homeowners to start thinking about this, but it does take time. We don't know specifically how long it takes, but we're going to be testing along the way in this process just to make sure that by the time we're back there, it's as clean as possible. Because otherwise, if you wait to start doing this after you've built, after you've moved in, you're going to be living in that environment with toxins, whether you want to be or not. So that's part of the reason we're taking such an intense focus on doing this before we start building.
Yeah, and I've been in so many different community meetings where it's like we need more trees, we need to plant, we need to get water, and I know that there are different organizations out there, and I even know the water companies will turn your water back on if you need to. Like that is happening. I have neighbors who are doing that right now. They want to keep their roses. It's so funny when you see like an entire house burned down and the beautiful rose bushes in the front somehow make it. It gives you a little bit of hope, right?
Yeah.
So with that, because we're all having to figure out timing, right? And so like I'm thinking, hey, there are these trees I want to put at the very back of my property, and if I'm going to do anything like that now, I put them there because that won't get in the way of construction, and then it just nothing's going to be in the way. But I think you bring up a really good point, which is like if we're all in this permitting process where we're just going to have to wait for things anyway, now a really good time to get the soil where it needs to be so that by the time you're building. So sell me on that timeline as just like, let's like do this before construction as opposed to after, because it sounds to me like, again, I'm all optimism. So there's probably some things in there you got to ask me to pump the brakes on, but it sounds to me like if we all loved our old fruit trees and we want to grow them the day we move back in, like this is the way or a way to accelerate that process? Am I thinking the right way here?
There's a few different things that I think are important to consider. One is, Joe spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to just add a little bit more kind of definition to this, which is the difference between phytoremediation and mycoremediation. If you're using traditional, plants, if you're using California native plants, which are really important and valuable to the, land that we live in, if that's your process for remediation, then all of those toxins in the soil are going to get sucked up into that plant. And so if you're planting a fruiting tree, if the soil's not clean, then it's going to suck up the toxins from that soil. They're going to be in the fruit, and then it's going to be inedible. And so typically the way that bioremediation process works is that after it cleans the soil, you cut down those trees, you cut down corn, you cut down whatever it is you've grown there. And then the toxins are really actually in that plant still. So then you're dealing with disposing of toxic plant material. So you can't just throw it into, a green bin, for example. And so I think that, I don't know if doing mycoremediation now will allow someone to plant as soon as they move in a safe environment, but that's sort of why, we're going to continue to test along the way. And so, you want to test at different levels and really talk to a professional who knows, you're going to test on the surface, you're going to test, 3 inches down, you're going to test 12 inches down. And when you get that, clean bill of health from your tester, your soil tester, your scientific partner, whoever it is, then I feel like, you can consider, planting trees that are going to bear fruit that you'll eat. But if you don't remediate before you plant, you're going to be kind of back at square one. And so mycoremediation, or taking remediation seriously at this stage, regardless, is going to help you get to a place sooner where you can plant, plants that you're going to consume.
Yeah, I think if I can get a little bit more into that, that is all true. And there's a lot of variation to some of those things. But I think the most important thing is like soil health and building the soil. And even if like you don't say like do the route that we're doing, mycoremediation just refers to mycology, to fungus itself. And there are native fungi that do remediation, particularly mycorrhizal and white rot, which is basically decomposing wood chips or wood material. So even something like, and there's a group of people, not really an organization, I mean, several organizations that have come together like, okay, what's the large scale plan? Because the way that we're doing it right now it's the time that it takes to do the process that we're doing wouldn't really work for all of Altadena. But that's not to say that you can't do it or that there isn't also an effective process. And we're working on that, like a to scale process, which is basically getting these elements, which are compost or fertilizer, natural fertilizer, wood chips to cover that, and then water to water it down. Now, the wood chips act as two sort of things that we're also doing at the garden, but we're using straw instead of wood chips. But if you create enough of a layer of wood chips, it'll protect the fungal network at the line of decomposition. So that mycorrhizal network will formulate at the area that the wood chips are breaking down. Now, the fertilizer and the water will help that process maintain and speed up, because fungus doesn't really like to be in hot weather. So, which is why we're putting so much straw on top. That is to insulate the fungus from the sun, and from the heat. So it's better to sort of wait until after the high heat of the summer, like late summer, start this process where lay down fertilizer, put wood chips on top of it, put a significant amount of wood chips on top of it, a couple inches at least, and water that in. We'll start to, really create all these enzymes and break down all this stuff and create mycelial networks on their own. you can sort of speed that process up by inoculating it with local spores, but you don't have to. And I think if we think about the easiest way for all of Altadena to sort of utilize this is really trying to create that as simple a process that'll work over time. And we're talking, a couple of years instead of a couple of months. And I think that's the difference between local fungus, like local mycorrhizal, and oyster mushrooms is just that the strain of mycelium, which is the oyster strain, has a higher rate of remedial effect. So it works more quickly or more efficiently at removing toxins than something like white rot fungi or mycorrhizal fungi. But we'll still do that. They still have those properties, and all the other microorganisms in the soil will help to remediate the toxins in that area.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're like, this all sounds really good. I don't have an oyster mushroom guy. I don't even have a hay guy. I guess I can go to Home Depot and get a bunch of wood chips. But where would you kind of even start to think about how to do this? Given these different things that you need to purchase, plant, water, how does anyone get started?
Well, hopefully, part of our process from the garden is documenting all of this, showing the results, and then making an educational component alongside with it so that people can replicate it. That's our big goal. Hopefully, with these other organizations that are involved, we're going to try to force the governmental apparatus into providing the support for residents to participate in this. The county does have a lot of these networks already built. It just hasn't been applied to post-fire per se. So hopefully getting them to focus more on these efforts with their resources, people will be able to have a lot more available to them. And hopefully once we are done or as we go, we'll be able to give residents more information on this and how they can do it themselves.
Right. If I can chime in to add something, part of this is also about there's the educational component, but there's also the question of who's interested in doing this, who's thinking about this. And the more people who you get to think about doing this for their own home, the more likely you are to find organized support networks that can provide the materials that are needed for homeowners to do this. And we're not really at that place yet. We're really trying to raise awareness of the toxicity of the soil that we will be living in when we return to Altadena, education about sort of ways to treat and, regenerate your soil, and then getting people to think about how they're going to do that with themselves so that there is at some future point an opportunity to organize around that. Does that sound like, Joe, what you were getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because right now it's a lot for homeowners to think about, because right now you're working with your architect, you're getting your drawings, you're trying to get your permits together, you're trying to find your contractor, some of us are still dealing with insurance, and thinking about what your landscaping is going to look like is kind of the last thing any of us are thinking about. But this isn't about landscaping. This is about health. This is about taking care of, the health of your body, your family, when you return to your home, your beautiful new home.
Absolutely. And I think there's something that's actually, because you're right. And especially in the beginning, we had insane decision fatigue, right? Oh my gosh, we got to do this. We got to do that. Yeah. But certain things a lot of us are kind of understanding what it's going to be with our insurance companies.
Right.
We're working with an architect, but at some point we're submitting things. And then there's a waiting game. And I had this weird thing happen a couple of weeks ago. I was just going to check on the lot, as I do from time to time. And my neighbors came, and I hadn't seen them in a minute. And they needed to put a tarp over their pool. And I can't tell you how great it felt to feel like I was doing something.
Yeah.
Right. It was like I was hands-on doing something to improve what, their situation. And it just felt great. And I think that as we go and we get into more of a waiting game, and we are in that place where it's like, okay, now we're doing the permit thing, and then we got to get the contractor, and then we got to get started. There is time, and like there's a feeling of fulfillment that I think can exist if we're actually getting ahead of this. If we are, and it's going to take work, right? But I think that's also work that people want to do, right? Like I feel like we want to feel like we can do something. And I think that's what's really interesting as we're having this conversation is it's like, yeah, the last few times I've been going up to the lot, it kind of just looks the same now. Most everybody's cleared. Like I'm like still kind of envisioning the house, but I've kind of done that a million times. And like,
yep, exactly.
I need a new project, but it would like, I think as we're all trying to work in whatever this rebuild is for each person, we want to feel progress. And I do think there's a time you're going to feel helpless. And so whether you're able to do this awesome mycoremediation with the oyster mushroom strain, or we just kind of do something a little bit more simple, I think it's an area that people could focus on. So to have that feeling, right?
Right. I agree. And I also want to point out that today's the 6-month anniversary of the fire. So, it's a good moment to kind of pause, take stock of what you've done, take stock of how much you've grown and how much you've developed over the time, and think about what the next 6 months are going to look like. And for us, it's going to be different for every homeowner. Every homeowner's got to do what's best for them. But for me and my family, that is looking at the health of our soil.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's, there's this, the feeling of like, let's do this, let's rebuild. Like, I think this is just a new frontier for a lot of people. So I'm going to ask some dumb questions here. So let's say I dive in to this. I'm all in. I start in August, and then my contractor shows up, and fingers crossed January. And like, how does everything work from there? Like, because at that point now we're having to, build a house, build a foundation. Obviously, some parts of the house are always going to be where the house is, and then the yard where the yard is. But how do I think about that confluence of my yard and construction and getting all of this prepared?
I can tell you how we're thinking about it. And back to this question of different types of remediation, part of the reason this sort of, I don't know how to describe, it's like more kind of ground-based versus like planting plants. So if you go with a more traditional bioremediation and you plant a bunch of California native plants to remediate your property, those are going to get trampled. Those are going to get stomped over by your contractors. And this is typically why landscaping is the last thing that you do once you've gotten your certificate of occupancy, so that all of the heavy machinery doesn't, ruin your beautiful yard. And so part of our thinking about, how we're going to remediate our soil is also thinking about, dealing with this while construction's going on. And if you can get this activity started in your soil before the contractors come in, the mycelium or the mycorrhizal networks, as Joe was talking about earlier, are going to be there. They're going to be in your soil, and they will continue to do what they're good at, which is cleaning the soil. And so if there are any additional contaminants that come from the construction, the thinking is, and this isn't health advice, we recommend everybody, do your research, talk to a scientist, talk to your doctor, talk to your lawyer, talk to everybody who you need to. The thinking is that the mycorrhizal networks that are in the healthy soil that you've built before you start construction will continue to keep that soil healthy. And it's better than doing nothing, because otherwise you're going to be adding that construction dust onto your already unhealthy soil from the fire and dealing with this, 6-12 months when you move in. That's kind of how we've been thinking about it at my house.
I think it's a great life lesson for anything, right? It's better than doing nothing. Like, you're going to make progress towards having healthy soil doing it now than later. I get that. Right. So Joe, I got a question about the Altadena Community Garden, the actual garden itself. Mm-hmm. Stewart mentioned we're recording this on the 6-month anniversary. The 1-year anniversary, 6 months away, January 7th, 2026. What does the Altadena Community Garden look like?
Well, it all depends on the results. You know,
What do you want it to look like?
what I want it to look like, I would like to welcome everyone back. I think, you know, there's been a lot of people helping us along the way, and each one of them, I tell them, hey, we're gonna have a big party when we come back. You know, like we're gonna have you out, we're gonna have you in the garden. It's a magical place. It is truly beautiful, and not just the landscape, but the people that come through it, and all of the people that reached out to me after the fire, and you know, so many people. How can we help? What can I give you? You know, how do I fit in? And a lot of people have stepped up, and I would like to see, if all goes well, I would like to see welcoming back of the membership, and a celebration of all the people that have worked so hard to get us there. You know, that's the goal. That's the hope. We do have a major hurdle, which is our permanent structure. And I think aside from that, we should be able to meet that mark. We might have to close back down when we start the construction of the building, for however long that takes. But I hope to be back in January, and to welcome people, and to, you know, but it's also hard because a lot of the residents, their homes won't be back. They won't have rebuilt by January. So making whatever their commute to get there will be difficult. So we'll have to deal with that. But we hope to have everybody back in January.
So when you say have everybody back, does that mean when, you know, your members can come, they have safe soil and they can start growing again?
Yes.
Okay. So if, you know, again, just talking timelines here. So we're looking at 6 months of real work here in the mycoremediation. I know we're doing testing and we're measuring it, but
Yeah.
we do believe, and we do think there's a strong probability that we're going to be able to grow that again then. And so I don't know. You know, you said maybe people don't want to commute. I feel like anything that we can have control over right now, we'll take it, man. Yeah.
There is a sort of like,
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, you know, the transition from devastation to hope is really powerful, and like has been how I've been operating in the past couple months. You know, like showing up to meetings and just being like, you know, red-eyed and like tearful, and then going like, seeing the progress, seeing, you know, this north side of, you know, where our most toxic zone was, just like walking it and being there and seeing all the life return, it's truly a magical thing. And to like be there with it, and to know that it's there because of your support and the support of others, is a really hopeful thing. And I think, you know, that is sort of also what Altadena Community Gardens is about. It's about, you know, giving that to people, that hope, you know, like showing people the way, and bringing them back together. It is really meaningful. And like, there's a lot of other things in the works, you know, like even if we still show a little toxicity on that north side, and we have to wait a little bit longer, you know, we're also installing an urban orchard. We're going to start a fruit share program. We're going to start all these things. We're going to do outreach. We're going to connect residents to tree donors and things like that. There's still a lot of really important and meaningful activities to participate in. So it is really hopeful, and it is really beautiful, and hopefully we can get the membership back in at the beginning of the year.
Nice. Stewart, were you going to add something?
Oh, I was just going to add that I felt like it was important to clarify that, you know, that 6 month timeline That's how the garden is thinking about it based on the soil testing that we've done there. But that's going to depend on every homeowner and the toxicity level on their property. So it's helpful to kind of keep in mind that the level of impact that the fire had on your property is going to determine the length of time before you should be comfortable planting.
Yeah, and if I can say too, with that, you know, the houses are going to show different levels of different substances, and how long it takes for that particular substance varies. But we have a sort of sister site that showed different toxic results, and so as far as like a scientific standard, we're taking a site that has shown a lot more toxicity, and we are remediating that site as well along with ours. So we'll be able to have more information along with what we have. We'll have more information on different substances and the effect that remediation plays. So there's going to be not just oyster remediation, but we're doing several plots. So we're doing phytoremediation with plants, and we're comparing the notes of each level of different method, so that we can use that information to give to other people for their plots or for their sites, their homes, or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Their properties.
It sounds like you guys are really, pushing this education campaign. So where should everyone follow along? Is it social media? Is that the easiest place right now?
Well, it's still in its infancy. We will hopefully have this educational materials on our website. Our website definitely needs an update. It's pre-fire. We've been so entrenched in all of this that we haven't had a
Priorities. I get it.
And we're all volunteers. So we are limited in our time and scope, but we hope to have all of this information available as a resource on our website.
Well, you might be volunteers, but I also think you're leaders. And I think that everybody here who's been affected by the fire, who's loves Altadena, who loves gardening or planting or anything, wants more trees, wants more fruit, want more veggies, and they are looking at you. So as leaders, here's my last question. Joe, why should we be optimistic about what our soil is going to look like, let's say 5 years from now, and our ability to come back and to be able to grow healthy and to be able to eat off our own land again?
Well, it's up to us. We should be optimistic because it's what we want. And that just has to match our commitment. Our commitment has to match our desire. And I think we can get there. We just have to do it.
I love that. Awesome. Joe, Stewart, thank you guys so much. This has been great.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Appreciate it.